I stood in the back of the boardroom, arms crossed, watching as Richard Bennett's confident smirk disintegrated. His face turned ashen when the chairman opened the sealed envelope I'd sent. Documents spilled across the polished mahogany table. Bank statements, doctored invoices, and offshore account details. The projector flickered to life, displaying the video I'd recorded 3 months ago. Richard openly discussing how he'd been siphoning company funds for years. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. The chairman's eyes, cold as steel, locked onto Richard. "That's exactly what we'd like to know." Richard's gaze darted frantically around the room before landing on me. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by pure hatred. 2 security guards entered silently through the side door. "You," he hissed. "You'll regret this, Isabella." I smiled. "I don't think so. Not this time. After all, revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about justice. And sometimes, justice requires patience, precision, and meticulous planning. This is how it all began. 6 months earlier, I hurried across the office floor, balancing a stack of quarterly reports in my arms. As financial analyst for Meridian Enterprises, I'd spent weeks preparing these documents for today's executive meeting. The company had been struggling lately, with revenue down nearly 15% from the previous year, but no one seemed to understand why. "Morning, Bella," called Marcus from the IT department as I passed his desk. I nodded in acknowledgement but couldn't stop. Richard Bennett, CFO and my direct supervisor, hated tardiness more than anything. 3 years working under him had taught me his many pet peeves, and I'd become expert at navigating his volatile personality. I reached the conference room just as the executive team began filing in. Richard stood by the doorway, his expensive suit impeccable as always, steel gray hair perfectly styled. At 52, he maintained the physique of someone a decade younger, a fact he never failed to mention during company functions. "Cutting it close, Isabella," he murmured as I slipped past him. "Sorry, sir." "Final revisions," I replied, distributing the reports around the large oval table. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just be prepared. The CEO wants answers about these numbers." I took my seat against the wall, behind the executives, but close enough to provide information if needed. Our CEO, Margaret Chen, entered last, her presence commanding immediate attention. At 65, she'd built Meridian from a small consulting firm into a respected financial services company with offices in 3 countries. "Let's get started," Margaret said, opening her folder. "Our shareholders are concerned, and frankly, so am I. Revenue is down, expenses are up, and our latest audit shows some inconsistencies." Richard cleared his throat. "As I've explained, Margaret, the market has been volatile. Our competitors are facing similar challenges." "Perhaps," Margaret replied, "but they're not showing the same pattern of accounting anomalies that our external auditors flagged." I straightened in my chair. This was news to me, and judging by the expressions around the table, to most others as well. Richard's face remained composed. "Minor bookkeeping errors. My team is addressing them." His gaze flickered briefly to me, a warning I'd learned to recognize. "Keep quiet." The meeting continued, with Richard deftly deflecting concerns and promising improvements by next quarter. Afterward, he caught my arm as I gathered my materials. "My office. Now." I followed him down the corridor to his corner office with its sweeping views of the city skyline. He closed the door firmly behind us. "The auditors are becoming a problem," he said, loosening his tie slightly. "I need you to prepare an alternative set of financial statements. Clean ones." I blinked. "Alternative statements? I don't understand." Richard sighed as if explaining to a child. "The ones they've seen contain all creative accounting. I need you to reverse engineer statements that won't raise flags." "You want me to falsify company records?" My voice came out higher than intended. "I want you to fix a situation," he countered smoothly. "Unless you'd prefer I mention your error from the Henderson account last year, the one I covered for you." My stomach dropped. The error had been following his direct instructions, but he'd ensured the paper trail pointed to me. It was the first time I'd realized just how calculating Richard could be. "This isn't right," I said quietly. Richard's smile vanished. "Right doesn't pay for your mother's care facility, does it? Or your sister's college tuition?" The threat hung in the air between us. My family depended on my salary, especially since Dad's death 2 years ago. Fine, I finally said. I'll need access to the original records. That's my girl. His smile returned, all charm now. Check your email. Everything you need is there. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at my laptop screen in disbelief. The creative accounting Richard mentioned was actually systematic embezzlement. For at least 3 years, he'd been diverting funds to shell companies, disguising the transactions as legitimate business expenses. The amounts were staggering, nearly $3.2 million. I couldn't sleep. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would gather evidence, but not to create fake statements, to expose him. Over the next 2 months, I meticulously documented everything. I created secure backup files, traced money flows, and even managed to record Richard discussing the scheme when he thought we were alone. I worked late nights, feigning compliance while building my case. Then came the day everything fell apart. I'd stepped out for lunch, forgetting to lock my computer. When I returned, Richard was standing at my desk, my email to the company's ethics hotline open on the screen. Reporting me, Isabella? His voice was dangerously soft. After everything I've done for you, Richard, clear out your desk. Security will escort you out. You can't fire me for reporting fraud, I protested. His laugh was cold. I'm firing you for incompetence. The quarterly projections you submitted last week were riddled with errors. Fortunately, I caught them before they reached the board. Those projections were perfect, I argued. Not according to the copies in the system. His smile was vicious. Your work has been substandard for months. I've been documenting it. I realized then how thoroughly he'd outmaneuvered me. He'd been preparing for this possibility, creating a paper trail to discredit me if necessary. 2 security guards appeared. Richard watched with satisfaction as they escorted me out, carrying a small box of personal items. Colleagues stared as I walked the gauntlet to the elevator, humiliation burning through me. Good luck finding another position in finance, Richard called after me. My recommendation won't be glowing. Outside, rain poured down as I stood on the sidewalk, jobless and seemingly powerless. But in that moment, something hardened inside me. Richard Bennett had taken my job, threatened my reputation, and jeopardized my family's security. This wasn't over. My apartment felt smaller after losing my job. The walls seemed to close in as I paced, thinking through my options. Richard had been thorough. He'd not only fired me, but had already begun calling my industry contacts, spreading stories about my incompetence and ethical lapses. 3 interviews had been canceled in the span of 2 days. My savings would cover expenses for maybe 2 months. My mother's care facility alone cost nearly $4,000 monthly. I made tea and sat at my small kitchen table, opening my laptop. Richard might have the original files at the office, but he didn't know about my backups. I'd been paranoid enough to create multiple copies, storing them in various secure locations. My phone rang. It was Lily, my younger sister. Bella? Is it true? Mom's nurse said you lost your job. I sighed. It's complicated, Lil. What happened? You've never been fired from anything in your life. I discovered my boss has been stealing from the company. When I tried to report it, he fired me and destroyed the evidence. Silence stretched between us. Then, what are you going to do? The question hung in the air. What could I do? Richard had institutional power, connections, and had effectively blacklisted me in our industry. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not giving up. After hanging up, I stared at the rain streaking down my window. Something my father used to say came back to me. When you can't win by force, win by strategy. Dad had been a chess player, methodical, patient, always thinking 5 moves ahead. Richard had played his opening gambit. Now it was my turn. I opened a new document and began typing the Bennett exposure plan. Step 1, find allies. Marcus from IT had always been friendly, and more importantly, he disliked Richard. I met him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. I heard what happened, he said, sliding into the booth. Nobody believes you're incompetent, Bella. Thanks, but belief doesn't pay bills. I leaned forward. I need your help. His eyes widened as I explained what I'd discovered. That's serious criminal activity. I know. And I have proof, but not enough to overcome Richard's influence. He's been with the company for 15 years. I need access to more records. Marcus fidgeted with his coffee cup. You're asking me to risk my job. I'm asking you to help stop a crime. You wouldn't have to do anything illegal. Just help me navigate the system one last time. After nearly an hour of discussion, Marcus reluctantly agreed to help, but with conditions. He wouldn't directly access any files for me, but he would advise me on how to remotely access my old work accounts. The IT security protocols have a weakness, he explained. Your credentials aren't fully deactivated for 72 hours after termination, a system flaw Richard ironically refused to let us fix because it was too expensive. That night, I logged into the company system using Marcus's instructions. I had less than 2 hours before the nightly security scan would detect unusual activity. Working quickly, I downloaded financial records, email correspondences, and most importantly, the original versions of documents Richard had altered to discredit me. I also discovered something unexpected. Richard wasn't working alone. Several emails hinted at collusion with James Wilson, the procurement director. They had established fake vendor accounts together, approving payments for services never rendered. By the time I logged out, I had enough evidence to build a solid case. But I still faced the problem of credibility. Richard would claim the documents were fabricated by a disgruntled ex-employee. I needed more. Step 2. Build an airtight case. I spent the next week analyzing the documents, creating timelines, and mapping money flows. The pattern was clear. Over $3.2 million had disappeared into offshore accounts over 3 years, disguised as payments to vendors or consultants. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand Richard's vulnerabilities, his personal life, his habits. I reached out to Sarah, who had worked as Richard's executive assistant before moving to another department. He fired you? Sarah looked shocked when we met for lunch. But you're his golden girl. Not anymore, I replied grimly. I need to know everything about him, Sarah. Habits, routines, personal issues, anything that might help me understand how to approach this. Sarah hesitated. I signed an NDA. I'm not asking for confidential company information. Just observations. Eventually, she opened up. Richard was meticulous about his image, but had a gambling problem he kept hidden. He frequented a high-end casino outside the city every Thursday night. He was also having an affair with Vanessa Porter from Legal, a married woman whose husband was a judge. He keeps a separate phone for her, Sarah added. In his desk drawer. These details might not seem immediately useful, but I filed them away. Every piece of information was potential leverage. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew dire. I took a temporary job at a local bookstore, working evenings after spending days building my case. The pay was minimal, but it helped slow the bleeding of my savings. My mother noticed my stress during my weekly visit to her care facility. You look tired, sweetheart, she said, patting my hand. Is everything all right? I forced a smile. Just busy, Mom. You're like your father, she said. He never complained either, even when things were hard. Her words stayed with me. Dad had always faced challenges head-on, with quiet determination rather than loud protests. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he'd simply asked the doctors for a treatment plan and followed it methodically until the end. I needed to channel that same focused determination. Step 3. Create an insurance policy. Richard was dangerous. He'd already demonstrated his willingness to destroy my career. If I moved against him directly, he might escalate further. I needed protection. Information so damaging that he wouldn't dare retaliate. The casino provided an unexpected opportunity. I began spending Thursday evenings in the parking lot, photographing Richard entering and leaving. After 2 weeks, I noticed a pattern. He always met the same man, a short, balding figure who seemed nervous. A quick internet search identified him as Darren Moss, a banker at First National, the same bank that handled Meridian's accounts. The next Thursday, I followed them inside, wearing a blonde wig and makeup that altered my appearance. I kept my distance, watching as they played poker at a high-stakes table. Money flowed freely, but more importantly, they talked. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I managed to record video from a discreet distance. Later, I hired a lip-reading expert to transcribe what they said. The transcription was gold. Richard was bribing Moss to help launder the embezzled funds through the bank's international transfer system. They discussed specific transactions and accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. This was the insurance I needed, evidence implicating not just Richard, but also a bank official in money laundering. If Richard came after me now, this information would go straight to federal banking regulators. But I still needed to address the immediate problem: my ruined reputation and financial situation. Step 4. Prepare for the confrontation. 3 months after my termination, I was ready. My evidence was organized, backed up in multiple locations, and damning. I had documentation of every fraudulent transaction, altered record, and cover-up. I also had leverage. Besides the casino videos, I discovered through careful research that Richard had been previously investigated for financial irregularities at his former company, a fact he'd managed to keep off his record through a confidential settlement. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Vanessa Porter, Richard's lover from legal, contacted me. "He's done the same to me," she said when we met at a quiet restaurant. "When I tried to end things, he threatened to tell my husband and ruin my career." "Why are you telling me this?" She slid a USB drive across the table. "Because I've been keeping records too. Emails, text messages, including some where he discusses the creative accounting you discovered. I was too afraid to use them before, but not anymore." With Vanessa's contribution, my case was complete. Now I needed to execute the final phase carefully. I prepared 3 packages. For the board of directors, complete documentation of the embezzlement scheme, including bank records, altered documents, and witness statements. For the SEC and FBI, evidence of securities fraud and money laundering, including the casino videos. For myself, the insurance file, to be released only if Richard attempted retaliation. Then I requested a meeting with Margaret Chen, Meridian's CEO. To my surprise, she agreed to see me privately at her home on a Sunday afternoon. Her modernist house overlooked the bay, all glass and clean lines. She led me to a sunroom where tea was already set out. "I've been expecting you," Margaret said, pouring tea. "Richard's explanation of your dismissal never rang true." I placed a thin folder on the table between us. "This is a summary of what I've discovered. The complete files will be delivered to the board tomorrow morning." Margaret reviewed the documents silently, her expression unchanging. Finally, she looked up. "You've been thorough." I had to be. "Richard is influential and careful." She nodded slowly. "What do you want, Isabella?" "Justice," I replied. "And my reputation restored. Not reinstatement." I shook my head. "I can't work for a company that allowed this to happen." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're planning to sue?" "No. I'm planning to move forward. But Richard needs to be held accountable, and the shareholders deserve the truth." After a long pause, Margaret said, "The board meets tomorrow at 9. Be there." Step 5. Execute. I arrived at Meridian's headquarters at 8:30 the next morning, dressed in my best suit. The security guard, recognizing me, almost denied entry until Margaret's assistant appeared and escorted me upstairs. The boardroom was filling with directors when Richard walked in. He froze momentarily upon seeing me, then recovered with a dismissive sneer. "What's she doing here?" he demanded of Margaret. "I invited her," Margaret replied calmly. "Please, everyone take your seats." Richard sat directly across from me, his confidence apparently restored. "If this is about Ms. Sinclair's termination, I have comprehensive documentation of her performance issues." "Actually," Margaret said, "this concerns financial irregularities that have recently come to light." Confusion flickered across Richard's face, followed by the first hint of concern. Margaret nodded to her assistant, who distributed sealed envelopes to each board member. "Please review these materials carefully." And this is where I began, standing in the back of the boardroom, watching Richard's confident smirk disintegrate as the evidence of his crimes spread across the table. The security guards weren't there by coincidence. Margaret had arranged for them after reviewing my evidence the previous day. Richard's face contorted with rage as he was escorted from the room. "This isn't over," he hissed as he passed me. "Actually, it is," I replied quietly. The FBI is waiting in the lobby. I wasn't bluffing. Federal agents had received my package simultaneously with the board, along with my agreement to testify. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Richard and James Wilson were arrested on multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Darren Moss from the bank quickly accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. The company's stock took an initial hit when the news broke but stabilized once Margaret announced comprehensive financial reforms. As for me, the board offered a generous settlement in exchange for my discretion regarding the company's initial handling of the situation. I used part of it to secure my mother's care and my sister's education, investing the rest to start my own financial consulting firm specializing in fraud detection. 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor at my new office. Margaret Chin stood in my reception area, looking appraisingly at the modest but professional space. "You've done well," she observed. "Thank you for coming," I replied, leading her to my office. "Richard Bennett was sentenced yesterday," she said once we were seated. 15 years. No possibility of parole for at least 10. I nodded. "I heard. You could have destroyed Meridian with this scandal," Margaret continued. "You showed restraint." "My issue was with Richard, not the company." Margaret studied me for a moment. "We're establishing an ethics and compliance division. We need someone with both financial expertise and uncompromising integrity to lead it." I smiled. "Are you offering me a job, Margaret?" "I'm offering you a seat at the table. Director level, reporting directly to me. The board has already approved it." The irony wasn't lost on me. Less than a year ago, I'd been escorted from the building in disgrace. Now I was being invited back with a promotion 5 levels above my previous position. "I'll consider it," I said. And I did. But ultimately, I declined. My consulting firm was growing, focusing on helping companies identify and prevent the very type of fraud I'd uncovered. More importantly, I valued my independence now more than ever. Richard Bennett had taught me a valuable lesson. When faced with injustice, patience and meticulous planning are more powerful than immediate reaction. He had all the institutional power, connections, and resources. Yet in the end, evidence and truth prevailed. Sometimes justice requires playing the long game. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's thriving in spite of those who tried to destroy you.